This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gullo.
I'm Dave McDonald.
And I'm Tim Rosenberg.
And our guest this week is a composer and clarinetist. He's collaborated with playwrights, artists, and filmmakers. Has been commissioned by the LA Phil, the Boston, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis Symphonies, the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and Eighth Blackbird, among numerous other ensembles and institutions. He currently serves as the director of Copeland House's Cultivate program for emerging composers, and was recently appointed artistic director of the American Composers Orchestra. And his name is Derek Bermel. Derek, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, for people who are watching this later, we actually are recording at 11 p.m., so I think we're all entitled to say we're pretty much troopers.
Why do you say that? Derek was just explaining earlier that this is like breakfast.
That's true. That's true. I mean, you do need your cocktail, I guess.
That's right. Well. It's your breakfast cocktail.
Yeah. Well, Derek, needless to say, we're happy you could come on at this time. And we wanted to especially talk with you now because of the recent announcement of your becoming artistic director of the ACO, an ensemble that you've had a lot of collaboration with over the years. So I'd love to hear from you about exactly what you will be doing in the capacity in this role for the ACO and what we might expect coming into the future here.
Well, I've had a long history with ACO, actually. The first time that I worked with ACO was back in 1994 when my piece, Dust Dances, was read by the orchestra as part of what's now called the Underwood Readings. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first time that I worked with the ACO was in the context of those readings. And that's something that the orchestra does every year and just completed doing a couple months ago. We did the same series of readings with young composers. I had the good fortune to be commissioned by the orchestra a couple years later, and I wrote a clarinet concerto called Voices, which I played myself with the orchestra. And then several years later, I was asked to be the composer in residence there under the auspices of a Music Alive grant, which is now the organization New Music USA offers these kinds of grants to orchestras and composers. And so I was there for 3 years, and each year I wrote a new piece, one in collaboration with Wynton Marsalis and the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, and another piece with Theremin and orchestra, and then I wrote a third work for the orchestra based on some of Bartok's letters. And finally, they asked me to stay on as what they called creative advisor. And this past year, Robert Beezer, who's been the artistic director for about 12 years or so, resigned, and decided to, he's been doing lots of different projects. And I think he had been there for quite a while, and he decided to step aside and stay on as the kind of emeritus, which is what he is now. And so I stepped into artistic director role, and it's exciting for me because, over the years I've had the chance to do all kinds of things like work with the kind of composer performer series called Orchestra Underground, and just work with the ACO as a mentor for young composers and for emerging composers for the Underwood New Music Readings, and just do all kinds of different things. We've started new initiatives like Earshot, which is a national reading network involving orchestras all over the country. And so it kind of just expands the whole idea of readings for emerging composers to be possible to do with many different orchestras all over the country. And now we've started this Jazz Composers Orchestral Institute that we did 2 different rounds of We just completed the last round a few days ago at the Miller Theater in Columbia University. It was really cool. So ACO's been, it's been a great experience for me, just in terms of giving back in these past few years, all because ACO gave me so much as a composer, as it did for many other composers. And I hope I can continue to really serve the composer community by, in this new role as artistic director.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that Earshot program sounds incredible. How widespread is that throughout the country?
Well, the idea of Earshot came about because I guess the guy, Jesse Rosen, who's now the head of the American Symphony Orchestra League, he's on the board of ACO, and he used to run ACO as the executive director as well. And Jesse kind of, along with Michael Geller at the ACO, they came up with this idea of trying to find a way to or a lot of orchestras have extra services that they often don't use because they don't have, it's not enough for a concert to make up a concert, but a lot of union orchestras and orchestras with pretty extensive seasons have these extra sessions that they haven't used. And so Earshot gives them a way to kind of turn some of those extra sessions into the opportunity for orchestras, for composers to have readings of their pieces. Like I said, because it's not, maybe they don't have enough sessions to do a full concert, but they have enough just to do readings. So what ACO does is it kind of leverages, we leverage our experience having done this so many times with the Underwood readings, so that we give them the chance to really make the most of the opportunity of doing these readings. Because many orchestras, they want to do readings, but they don't have enough experience doing them. They don't even know really where to start. So we give them a kind of a handbook. It's like a playbook for how to do this. And we help them set up the thing, get mentors, look through scores, give them a way of easily just planning and making it come off really well. Sometimes the readings turn into quasi-concerts. Sometimes they turn into actual concerts. And this year, I mean, over the years, we've worked with the Colorado Symphony, with the Memphis Symphony. We work with the Buffalo Philharmonic a couple times. Next year with the New York Philharmonic, with Detroit Symphony, but also youth orchestras. We've done many different types of these kind of readings, and at all different levels, and it's very exciting. Some really big orchestras, some really small orchestras.
Yeah.
And the idea is just that, what happened in this case, for example, when we're working with an orchestra like Buffalo several times, and we think that at some point, maybe they'll decide they want to do their own reading session, and then they won't even need us because they'll have work with us. And that's exactly, ACO wants to be a catalyst. And at the time when ACO started about 35 years ago, there really was so little American music being played by orchestras in this country. And now there's a lot more. And I think ACO is part of the reason for that, from commissioning new works and kind of just putting American composers on the map. And so we want to continue to do that, to just be a catalyst for new things to happen. So the more orchestras, like, for example, the Minnesota Orchestra, of course, we know they've had a lot of problems this year, but they developed their own wonderful reading series, and in a lot of ways it began kind of based on the ACO readings, and the same with the Chicago Civic Orchestra years ago. So, and now there are many more of these reading programs, and we hope that we could just continue. The best thing that can possibly happen is for us to not need to do this anymore, but we still need to keep doing it right now.
So what's the difference between what people normally do with a reading session, say maybe like a first rehearsal of a new piece, and what the American Composers Orchestra does in a reading session, and the things that you would recommend one of these other orchestras do in a reading session?
You mean, so like what would another orchestra
normally... So you
say
you work with these orchestras to make these reading sessions better.
Right.
What are some things that you recommend that they do that they may not have been doing before if they had been trying reading sessions? Like what are some things that make reading sessions different from the things that orchestras are normally doing, and that they don't anticipate?
Oh, there's a lot of things. I mean, time is so compressed in these situations. And so one of the things we try to do is to give guidelines for, how the composers, what's the kind of thing that we can, that the orchestra can do that will be the best possible thing for the composers in the end. For example, an orchestra may not even know that the composer wants to try to get a recording of their work. And that's a complicated thing sometimes to do, to
It's
set
extremely
up.
complicated.
Yeah, I mean, so it's the kind of thing where trying to make the reading work well for the composers involved is number one. So for example, we might do something like plan sessions with mentors, both composer mentors, but also performers who in the orchestra who will give feedback to the composers about, what did they like about the parts, what didn't they like about the parts, what was easy to read, what was harder, that kind of thing. And also because we can give advice about how the composers might learn in a way that where they can learn from what the other composers are doing as well. So that it's kind of group learning. You learn from what they tell you, but you also learn from what they tell your colleagues. And we try to help bring in experienced mentors who can help to fashion the discussion so that rather than just being people kind of sitting around talking, that it has some real structure and format. And of course, we help them plan when to bring the composers in, how much ancillary time to allow them with the conductor, all these kinds of things that are, they're just things that the orchestra might not have ever done before, and they might not be aware of how to structure the time, how much time the librarian needs to spend with the composers, how many hours they need to get the corrections in after the first reading, before the second reading, that kind of thing. And even the fact of being a first reading and second reading, because when we started, years ago, when I had my reading with the ACO, it was just one session. It was I had about 40 minutes with the orchestra. Now we tend to divide it into 2 days, and we found that works better for everybody, for the players, for the composers. And rather than doing these sessions kind of compressed, we try to spread them out. And so it's all those kinds of things that, you're talking about, there may be 70, 80 people who are hired for this thing. So they're very expensive and they're very compressed. Right. And so we just try to make it easier on the orchestras that are doing this.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually at the most recent Underwood readings a couple months ago. And that was a really fantastic experience, especially, with the composers being right there and getting the feedback from the other mentors that were there, and George as well. So,
George, you mean the conductor?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, it's really a communal kind of atmosphere, and I don't think any of the players are afraid to approach the composers either. So,
it's something we want to make it not about fear, but about learning. And fear can be one of the biggest obstacles. If people feel scared and kind of inhibited, then they're really not going to get the good experience that they could out of it. If everybody's really stressed out, of course it's a stressful experience. A reading is a traumatic experience no matter what. But even in the best of circumstances, but to try to de-stress as much as possible and for things just to run smoothly, it requires a lot of organization, a lot of forethought, a lot of planning. And so that's the art of trying to schedule and create a successful reading experience, both for the orchestra and for the composers involved. And of course, we feel like we're there to serve the composers.
Now, as far as concerts go, what would you say? Can we look forward in the next season as you pick up this new appointment? Concert-wise, is there anything else we might expect to be new, or is there a different approach being taken with venues or whatever it may be?
Well, we have our season at Carnegie. We do 2 or 3 concerts a year, and but we also have been doing concerts in other places because sometimes there's a musical reason for wanting to go to a different type of venue. Um, Sometimes I'm very interested in creative partnerships. So I'm particularly, I'd love to see us collaborating with dance, uh, with theater, with groups and venues that are in other disciplines, kind of reaching out because um, I think to encourage the most possible experimentation and openness. I think it's in ACO's interest and in the composer's interest to try to look at the entire world of music, which I mean, that encompasses so many different things, and there's so much that you can do in a concert hall. And I think we had a really nice success down at the World Financial Center in the Winter Garden Theater a couple years ago.
Hmm.
We planned the Sonic Festival where we had 120 different composers whose
Yeah.
works were featured on that, and they were young composers, so many of them had not really been heard from in New York, and we like to pick up on some of those initiatives and run with those things, and I'd love to see, like I said, more collaboration, more partnerships with other organizations, because I think that just strengthens us and it allows us to be really flexible and allows the mission to keep evolving. And I think ACO always has to be right on the cusp of exploring new possibilities. So I'd like us to have as many different resources as possible and to be able to go to many different types of venues too.
One thing that we end up talking about on the show a lot is the relationship that composers have with orchestras, and something that comes up a lot is how relevant orchestras are to new music. And I think from the perspective of a lot of composers, orchestra seems like a less relevant medium, and it seems like a medium that is more difficult than it's worth in a lot of ways. Is that something that you perceive from some of the people that you work with?
Well, look, I mean,
I mean, obviously, the orchestra is great, and I don't want to. I'm not trying
no,
to
no,
rip
no.
the orchestra, but I'm just trying to have a conversation about the changing culture of
Yeah.
contemporary music.
Well, this is exactly why we need ACO.
Exactly.
I mean, I feel that ACO, look, every year we get hundreds and hundreds of scores at ACO. People have not stopped writing for orchestra. So whether we want them to or not, they're doing it. So now some people are doing some very creative, interesting, unusual, radical things with the orchestra. I think it's ACO's job to try to figure out how we can move the orchestra in many different unusual directions. On the other hand, whenever you have a large group of people, it's hard to, it's expensive, and they're professionals. It's very expensive. Um, so the question of how to kind of, I was going to say many ways to skin a cat. Then I thought of my cats. So I won't use that particular saying. But no, look, I hear what you're saying, and I'm of the same mind. There are many, many projects that I do that are not orchestral projects, and by no means do I consider the orchestra any kind of summation or I don't consider it the be all end all of writing music. I think I'd just as soon hear Nan Caro's player piano works or a really great songwriter singing a song that they wrote than hear a full orchestra, especially if the orchestra piece isn't as good. Music is music, and it's emotional, it's beautiful, it's intellectual, it's transformative. It doesn't matter what genre that is. That said, I think that there's a lot that people still want to say with the orchestra, and I only think that because I see the scores that come in at an alarmingly fast rate to ACO. More people are writing for orchestra than ever, American composers and non-American composers. So what do we do with that? If people didn't feel the need to do it, I don't think they would do it. I don't think they're just doing it because it's something they think they should do. I think there may be some people who do, but I think orchestra is still a real need. I think what we have to figure out is how can we serve as many different composers as possible? And just because somebody wants to write for orchestra doesn't mean that they're going to continue to do that for the rest of their life. But maybe we should try to help as many people who want to at least try and work a little bit in that genre to do it. The point that you're making about the orchestra's relevance, this is something that American composers, starting with Charles Ives, began to tackle. I mean, Ives wrote quite a number of pieces for a small orchestra, many of which we've done with ACO, from Central Park in the Dark to those kind of small, to his kind of, these were pieces for kind of like a large ensemble, which actually Ives wrote just about in the same year that Schoenberg wrote the Chamber Symphony. Ives was writing Central Park in the Dark. So there's quite a number of Ives works for this type of instrumentation. And then since then, of course, John Cage, Morton Feldman, Duke Ellington, we're talking about people who kept experimenting. American composers kept experimenting with different genres, different types of groups. And now in the later generations, Steve Reich, Philip Glass, David Lang, and Michael Gordon, Julie Wolfe, who've all worked together with Bang on a Can Festival, but also composers who wrote for Gamelan. I mean, people have been there's been a real reaching out of American composers to try to find other ways of writing, and many of them have included orchestra in that. They've tried to write for kind of hybrid ensembles, which involve orchestras sometimes. And so I think that we just have to. ACO's role is to figure out how does the orchestra fit into this, and how can we continue to serve composers. If nobody's going to write for orchestra anymore, and we stop getting scores in the office, then we should probably pack up and leave. As it is now, we get hundreds and hundreds every year, and so as long as that's happening, we're just going to continue to keep trying to serve composers however we can. People still seem to want to write orchestra music.
Right, and that's why I think the work that you guys do with other orchestras is so important to kind of help them figure out how to work with composers, because they do it so rarely now that they're probably a little out of practice.
Yeah, people say to me, "Oh, is that a problem now that the New York Philharmonic is doing more new music?" I say, "No way! It's great that the New York Philharmonic is doing more new music." I mean, whatever we can. This is what ACO is about. It's yes, we are an orchestra. We're also an advocacy organization. We advocate for composers. We're there for the composers. So we're the only orchestra that has composers at the top of the food chain, as it were. I guess if I'm at the top of the food chain now, but what does that make me like? I don't know. If
and that is the episode title.
The Apex Predator.
Right.
Composer, the Apex Predator.
Yeah. No, it's like I think that that this is our role, and we're there for the composers. We have composer advisors. We have composers on the board. We have the composers who have the main role in the programming. I'm, I guess, chief programming officer, essentially CPO. I don't know. That's what I do now. And also, composers at the heart of the artistic, the artistic, heartbeat of the organization is composers. So I think it's different than what most orchestras do. I mean, it's great, like I said, when you get the New York Philharmonic, Alan Gilbert, who obviously has, who is passionate about new music, the Albany Symphony, David Allen Miller, Gil Rose with Bebop, lots of these orchestras, Marin Alsop, other conductors and of major orchestras involved with new music. That's great. That's exactly what we want to create. Yet ACO's structure is fundamentally has the composer at the center. We're not relying on the music director to necessarily be there, even though George is the music director, George Manahan. He does love American music and has conducted much American music, but here we put the composers actually into the power structure of the orchestra, so that we're running the show.
Right. That's really an
For better or
interesting
worse.
change from the way the composers are situated in the normal orchestra hierarchy.
Yeah, we're on the outside usually looking in, and we have to kind of show up and be nice and humble, which is not a bad thing to be. It's good to be nice, but it's in this situation, ACO, the ACO puts the composers at the center of the organization, and I think that's something that is very different. And if other orchestras want to do that, more power to them. More orchestras should put the composer at the center, but they don't always do that.
Right.
Perhaps more composers in residence.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, one of the things you mentioned. Go ahead.
To just speak for them, I mean, I think the LA Philharmonic has a very strong new music program because they've always had a composer very close to the programming to help with the programming. So Steve Stuckey did that for many years. John Adams is doing a lot of that now. And, you see it in their programming. You see it in the strength of their new music programming and in the commitment to presenting works written in the past few years by emerging composers and also by established composers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, Derek, you mentioned that one of the difficulties with doing a lot of new music stuff in orchestras is that it just is very expensive to do because you need a lot of people that are all very highly trained and very talented professionals. And that's obviously one of the barriers for a lot of American orchestras programming new music more regularly is that it's such a risk, right? They know what they're getting when they program Beethoven. They may not know what they're getting when they program, Derek Bermel or someone else. And I wonder or maybe I should just ask you, does the ACO do any kind of audience outreach to help bridge that gap as well, or is that something that you leave up to the other orchestras to do?
People usually come to ACO because people come to the ACO for a variety of reasons. Audience, some of them are composers. Come to see us.
Right.
But most of our audience are just people who want to hear something new, who want to hear something they've never heard before. In almost every other art form, in film, in literature, in dance, it would be unthinkable to not want to see what's new. But for some reason, in the concert music world, I mean, and of course, even in pop music, I mean, people want to see what's new. But in the concert music world, people want to hear what's old. So and that seems strange. A lot of audiences who go to hear, say, orchestral music want to hear something that's old. But the people who come to ACO concerts want to hear something that's new. They're like the same people who go to the latest art exhibition or who go to hear a poetry reading or spoken word reading, or who go to hear, go to see the latest dance piece. They're the ones that come to an ACO concert because to them it's important to know what's happening now, what's happening today, and what composers are writing today. And so, yeah, from my perspective, I think I love the great works of the past, and of course I studied Beethoven and Mozart and Dvorak and Tchaikovsky, and I studied those scores. I love that music, but I sometimes am quizzical about why people really want to only hear that. I don't think we have to do development because we have an audience for our concerts. On the other hand, I think it's to the advantage of major orchestras to start challenging their patrons and to be seeking new audiences, because otherwise there won't be any audiences. The demographics of the country are changing. Everybody knows that the kind of traditional classical audience is waning. So I think that new approaches need to be tried, and one of them is featuring the music of today. And I'm not so sure ACO has to worry about that as much as, because those people are
Right.
already coming to our concerts. I think the organizations that really have to worry about that are the ones that are trying to present the great works of the past. And maybe what we need to do is just to kind of keep trying to convince them that the works of today and the works of the future are something to be explored as well, and have
They have an audience.
big potential audiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we want to get you don't only just want to attract people that go to some other classical music concerts. You want to attract people who are interested in seeing anything new, and that's a big audience, actually.
Yeah. Well, and you, Derek, made some really interesting comparisons to other art forms, and it strikes me as appropriate because of the collaborations that you've done across forms before. And I wonder if those things are related for you. Maybe that's a way that we can help bring an audience to new music through collaborations that have audiences that are, like you said, already interested in this new thing.
Look, I mean, I think, I think you put it very well, and it's just that we just have to catch up with the rest of the world. I mean, or of the country, or whatever. I think that we in concert music, we have to really think a lot about just what everybody else is doing. I mean, read the paper. Journalists don't want to write about something old. They want to write about something new. They'd way rather write about something new. So if you can present something new and present it to them in a way that seems interesting and exciting, and I suppose there's a lot of ways to do that, they'd way rather write about what you're doing that's new. I mean, any journalist will tell you that it's much more interesting to write about the new than the old.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Now, with taking up this new position and all the other stuff you have going on, are you finding less time to perform yourself as a clarinetist, or is this just you're adding to it and you're still very much a performer at heart?
Well, I mean, I guess mostly at heart, I'm a composer, because that's performing. I have I guess my performing has a complementary relationship to my composing. So,
And not the other way around.
Yeah, no, I mean, I started off as a clarinetist, but I quickly got into composition when I was very young, about 11, and then I just kept going with that. And at various times I played clarinet more or less, or I played other instruments, or I played in bands, or did different things over the years. But performing has always been a way for me creatively to kind of get the compositional juices flowing. So at different times I've studied some different traditions, musical traditions, and tried to get my hands on the music and learn maybe certain instruments in Africa or Brazil or somewhere like that, where I tried to get a feel. But most of those things were kind of compositionally related. And as a clarinetist, I've ended up playing a lot of my own work, a lot of my colleagues' work, other composers' work, and that's been a nice way to kind of stay in the mix as a performer and just enjoy performing, because I do enjoy performing, but also to be studying scores, learning more in depth about a composer or a piece. Just today, I played at the Copeland House. I played the Bernstein Sonata, which was just such a pleasure to play his music, but I also played a piece of mine, and I was mentoring young composers up there. And in this Cultivate program, we had 6 wonderful young composers, just super talented, and we premiered their new works with some great musicians in residence. And to me, all these things, they all kind of go together, and but I do need to then remove myself from it to do other projects, because I always have a lot of composition projects.
Yeah.
So I do have to kind of sometimes take a hibernation break.
Yeah. I would like to, if it's all right with the rest of the panel, pivot a little bit from talking about some of Derek, the work that you do with ACO, to some of your music. because you are, as you just explained, primarily a composer. I feel like a lot of times we get composers on the show and they're doing really interesting projects that are kind of tangentially related to their music but are not actually their music, and we spend the whole time not talking about their music.
Yeah.
I feel bad about that
okay,
sometimes.
you know.
But so in reading about some of your music and listening to some of your music this week, I am struck by the breadth of your influences. It seems like you've got a lot of you get a lot of inspiration from not classical music, from not contemporary classical music. You've got music that pulls in a lot of pop influences, but also a lot of these collaborations with other art forms, like dance and sound installations and things like that. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe talk about how you pull from all these different sources that are maybe not the sorts of sources. Maybe you learned about these sorts of sources in school, but they're not something that I took a lot of classes in.
Oh, I didn't take so many classes in any of that. I think these are just experiences that throughout my life. I mean, I've always felt that I needed a certain amount of input in order to generate some output. So as an artist, I felt like it would enliven my own work to be constantly learning and bringing new things in. So sure, that started in school, but then it continued when I left school and when I wasn't at school, or in various times when I was off from school for whatever reason. I mean, I think it was experiences just in life, learning languages. I love language, and then the way that interacts with music. And as well as going to other countries to try to learn some of their music in context. But I just went where my heart led me. So if there was a type of music that I really wanted to explore more, like Bulgarian music, I went to Bulgaria and tried to set up a project for myself so I could go there for a given amount of time and work with a teacher very intensively, which I did in Bulgaria for a couple months. And I tried to learn the style, which is an incredible virtuosic style of clarinet playing, and also study a little bit of the vocal music while I was there. But those kinds of things were just, those were things that interested me. So if the project that we did with Yassine Bey, formerly known as Most Def.
Yeah, no longer Most Def.
Right. The Brooklyn Phil a couple years ago was really, I mean, that was because I really love what he does and his work, and I had analyzed his music in years past. I mean, it's up there on my blog if you want to look from years ago. I was, really interested in his music and his lyrics and his way of approaching rhythm and rhyme. And so for me, it was a learning experience. It was all these things. I did a collaboration with a mathematician at the Institute for Advanced Study last year, where I had been in residence for 4 years, and this mathematician, who's a symplectic geometer, he was working on a type of mathematics that bears relation to the Newtonian three-body problem, and it just turned out that I thought, wow, I could apply this to music and write a piece that's for open instrumentation. And maybe work with dancers on it. And so, and that was just, it happened that there was this Look and Listen Fest.
Uh-oh.
I don't remember the name of this kind of geometry that you were telling us about.
Yeah, sorry, I started going there and then.
No, it's good. It's good.
But I mean, basically, what I was trying to say is that I ended up in this collaboration with this guy who is a symplectic geometer at the Institute for Advanced Study, involving a piece that was for a John Cage tribute, which was for the Look and Listen Festival, and this piece was based on the Newtonian three-body problem, which allowed me to use three or more musicians and have them interact in this way. So it ends up being a piece with no notes or rhythms. Actually, it only has instructions for the players to set up their own piece, which can be 5 minutes long, or it can be 5 hours long, or 5 days long. But in any case, I mean, what I'm only telling you this to understand that it's just I have a lot of ways of getting into writing a piece of music. And some of them are quite abstract, but other ones are really very tactile and to do with playing music and experiencing and feeling music. And so I try to leave myself open to all these different possibilities. Some of them are problematic. And some of them work very naturally and beautifully. But almost everything that's worth it is problematic, has some kind of problem. And I like to try to. For me, what gets me going on a composition is having a problem to solve.
Yeah.
Finding a problem that I want to kind of tackle and solve.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I think that kind of curiosity and love of learning is something that composers share. It's one of the things that draws us to writing to begin with. And so one thing I wanted to ask you about with regard to some of those musical influences is that when I listen to music that incorporates influences from popular music or from jazz or funk or whatever, and or music from other cultures, it's really easy for it to fail and either be super cheesy or be kind of this pale gringo-rific version of
nice word.
That's why gringo-rific. Tell your friends. This gringo-rific version of this real authentic thing, kind of this pale imitation of this other thing. And it's something that you are very successful in avoiding. And I wonder if is that something that you consciously have to take yourself away from, just kind of imitating, for example, this Bulgarian music that you were into?
Oh, well, so you bring up a good point. I have always felt that I had to really get into the music that I was doing. I don't like the idea of using music for some purpose, or using some kind of maybe non-Western form in a Western format, or vice versa, really. What I try to do as best I can is to really absorb music into myself so that the music, whatever comes out, I think that way, if it's being ingested, I don't think it's good to just spit it back out. I think you need to shit it out. I think you need to ingest it. It has to be part of who you are. It has to come out, or let's say sweat it out. Maybe that's better. I don't care what term you use. The point is that it has to become part of you in order to be authentic. I don't love the word authentic, but I think it can feel more authentic to the listener. It can feel more real, more heartfelt, more connectable if it's actually part of your musical language. And sometimes I feel like I can't control what's part of my musical language. It comes from whatever is in me. But if I just take something and say, okay, I'm going to use this. I don't know much about it, but I'm just going to use it. I don't really feel it, but I'm going to use it here. It's probably not going to be so successful. But that's not the thing that makes me want to compose. The thing that makes me want to compose is when there's something inside me that wants to get out. So hopefully, it's very hard for me to know myself what you say, but I'm glad that you feel that it works for you.
Yeah, no, it's something that I was hoping that I would have the chance to ask you, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because I totally agree with what you just said about really absorbing the music, your musical influences, and not just kind of holding up a mirror to them, but really, taking them in and processing them however you will,
there's
through
some
all the
things I
other
would
music
love
that
to
you
know.
love.
Yeah, it comes from, it's about what you love. And one of my teachers, Henri Dutilleux, who just passed away last week or week before, um, he said something very deep to me, which is, he said, "On ne peut pas tout aimer." And, it's something that is a little bit of a refrain for him throughout his life. And I think it helped him to discover who he was musically, because early on he was very imitative of Ravel, and he acknowledged that. And it wasn't until he started to realize that you can't really love everything. You can only love some things. And I think the music that you write has to somehow come from that. There may be things that I really admire that other people do, but I may not really feel those things. And someone else has to write that music. That's somebody else's music. It's not my music. Uh, there are many composers whose work I greatly admire, but I could never write music like that, because it wouldn't be coming from me. Uh, so that's, I guess, the difference between admiring something and really loving it. When you love it, you want to take it in and you're connecting with it. And then it's easier to output something that's somehow authentic. But um, you know, if we're trying to be somebody else, which I think does happen quite a bit with artists, because we may admire somebody else, but we were not them, and we want to emulate who they are, then it may be problematic to actually output something that feels authentic to a third party who's trying to connect with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think I mean it's great that you even you explain your process and your thoughts on that. I mean, I love the idea of first of all going to Bulgaria just because you want to go to Bulgaria and learn. I mean, like, especially setting up your own project and like
Well,
immersing yourself in the culture and within the music, just to have that experience. I think
some of that,
more
I,
composers could do that more often.
I think it's just about understanding music in its context, like you would understand literature in its context. I've been reading Saramago, the Portuguese writer, and going to Portugal to see the country that he was writing about and feel what is going on there is very different um, than just reading about it, getting it in context. And likewise, seeing somebody dance to a xylophone beat in Burkina Faso is very different than just watching a player on YouTube
Yeah.
demonstrating it, or even meeting somebody in New York who shows you something. I mean, when you're over there, you get context. Just context just happens, and I think context can be important for epiphany, which is because context creates conflict.
Hmm.
And I think as artists, we kind of seek conflict. I don't know how all of you feel about that, but because from conflict comes tension, and from tension kind of can come one's own resolution with that tension.
Mm.
You and who you are in contrast, in conflict with this other thing, and where are those points of intersection, and where are those points where these things rub, and so that's what it's about. And that doesn't have to come from going to another country, but maybe even the context of opening up a medieval manuscript and studying Akagem. I don't know.
Yeah, man. That
He's not
sounds
really
great.
medieval, he's more Renaissance, but maybe he's on the cusp. But Periton, I don't know. Something Steve Reich got a lot from Periton.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Hildegard of Bingen.
Sure,
There
yeah.
you go.
She's
Everybody's gotten a
in
lot of
vogue.
mileage out of Hildegard.
Yeah.
Derek, listen, it's been really great talking to you. We're gonna pivot to the news. I don't know if you've got if you can stick around, that'd be great. We don't have a lot in the news this week. We're going to talk. Have you heard about this crazy thing with Christian Zimmerman, the pianist, in the phone thing?
Well, no, what happened?
Okay, so
did he get his Verizon phone tapped or something?
It's almost as bad as getting your Verizon phone tapped. It is at the Ruhr Piano Festival. A Polish pianist named Christian Zimmerman was performing, and in the audience, he noticed that somebody in the choir seats, so the seats that are kind of behind the stage, was recording on like a phone, like just taking a little phone video of the concert, and he stopped playing and left the stage in the middle of the concert. And he came back later, and first he asked the person to stop, and seemingly they didn't, and so he left. He came back and kind of angrily explained to everyone why it was upsetting to him, and he said at one point, kind of like lecturing the audience, that he had lost a recording contract or something because the label had told him that there was already a YouTube video of a performance of this work, and so therefore he didn't get a recording contract. And then he played a few more pieces and left, and was very upset and didn't come out to bow or go to any of the post-concert schmooze fests or play any encores or anything like that. So
he was not a happy camper.
No, I think that's probably an understatement. So I don't know. What do you guys think of a performer just bailing on a performance because somebody had their iPhone out?
I think it's really, really, really terribly small. I'm just getting familiar with this. I just read the articles here, but seriously, you're a pro, and you just can't do that. You can't be a person who can't put that aside in your mind and there was probably at least one person in the audience that night who had never heard Christian Zimmerman play, and that was their experience with him. That was it. And I just think it's a horrible way to represent yourself.
So you think it's left a bad taste in concert goers' mouths?
Of course, definitely.
I can imagine. You paid to go see this performance, and I wonder what the ticket situation was like after that. They get refunds?
Probably not.
I mean, he came back and played some more music. I don't know if he played the same thing that they bought tickets for, but I agree with Tim. I think it's really petty, and I find it very difficult to believe that he actually lost out on a record contract because there was a YouTube video. I don't doubt that maybe somebody told him that that's why they didn't want to sign a deal with him. But if you think that watching an iPhone recorded video on YouTube of a live performance of whatever he was playing is the same as a studio recording of that thing, then you deserve all of the music on YouTube and all of the comments that go with it, because that's not an analogous experience, right?
No,
and if that meets your requirement for a performance, then you're not the kind of person that's going to buy the CD anyway.
Yes.
What I want to know is the concert now up on YouTube with that video?
I don't know. I would love to know.
I think we would have found the link by now.
Yeah, I think that would have come out. Maybe the person was too mortified to put it up later or something.
Derek, as a clarinetist, would this be something that would really bother you in a performance setting?
I think it would depend on the context, but I think there are so many different ways that that recording, that kind of thing can come into a context which can either make people furious, or I think it might be actually interesting if there was some improvisatory aspect. I mean, there could be a way to integrate it into the piece, maybe somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of
or
how
if there
could you
was some
integrate that
improvisatory thing,
into
it would be nice to capture that one particular expression of the improvisation. You know, if that's the only way it's going to get captured.
I was just thinking it would be cool for him as a performer to have then turn that around and actually start to do something that was unusual. You know, I mean, I think one of the things about performances is that sometimes they're so kind of humdrum and they're doing the same thing, you know, in many, many different places, and there's a lot of pressure and stress. And maybe that stress just got to him. He was there. He had this bad experience in the past, and then it manifested itself in in this moment. But I was just thinking it could be creative to try to figure out, okay, somebody's doing this, so what can I do either to undermine it if I'm angry about it, to kind of continue to perform, but in a way that undermined what the person was trying to do, or just, you know, to somehow integrate what they were doing into the performance so that the person doing the video felt like they were also being videoed, or something, like maybe make people video them, like tell people, why don't you start videoing them?
Yeah,
as they video me, or whatever.
Performer gets her phone out and starts pointing back at the audience.
Just turn it around and kind of and find a creative thing to do. But I think, you know, it's true that one thing about the concert experience is that it's very, very jaded and ordinary sometimes. And so as a performer, if you could turn that around into something really unusual, then you might not have to have that negative reaction. You could make it into something very creative.
Yeah, right. And most often this often goes beyond any wish of the performer, in the fact that, you know, there are rules for the houses. Yeah. You know, it's all unionized, and especially with these large concert halls. I mean,
I'm sure the union people would have definitely thrown them out. I mean, if they could, because it's probably illegal. But it would be interesting to kind of turn the tables and make it into some type of larger performance where the audience was integrated.
Right.
You know, because if he's what he did anyway, broke down the walls, the fourth wall, whatever it's called, between the performer and the artist. So, I mean, between the audience and the artist. So in this case, maybe he could do that, but in a more creative way, to make something happen that was really interesting. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think that's awesome.
Well, go ahead, Tim.
I should say that as a performer, like if I saw somebody, or the line that Louis C.K. says, like, you know, don't text during the show because it just lights up your big dumb face. You know, like as a performer, it would bother the crap out of me to see that kind of backlit screen and the whole thing. You know, especially if it's in my field of vision, it would be really annoying. But you've still got to be a pro. Like, you've still got to deliver a performance. That's your job. And he failed at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's why I think he could have continued to perform somehow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just would have been a very different type of performance. In other words, if something's annoying you so much, like I've seen Joao Gilberto like yelling at audiences too, or even, you know, just because people are being loud or unruly, or I've heard, you know, hearing aids going off and all kinds of things while I was playing the quartet for the End of Time. And, you know, you're in this sublime moment on stage, and then you hear things and people, you know, and somebody brought a baby in or something. But you know, when I've been in a situation where there was improvisation and that was part of the situation, the performance, then sometimes you could bring something interesting to that moment, which would continue to have, I mean, because that wall's already broken, so you might as well go run with it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the union rules, Patrick, and I think it was Drew McManus, our guest actually from last week, pointed out on his blog that the real problem with the rule breaking in that kind of situation is actually more likely to be due to guest contracts. So whoever the guest artists are, and obviously this is a solo recital, so this is a little bit different than an orchestra. But one of the problems with doing this in other kinds of venues is not the regular CBA that the performers have with the company, but actually the guest artists' individual performance contracts. And he also pointed out, well, maybe it wasn't him, but several people.
And how many M&Ms are in certain jars and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, several people pointed out, though, also that this is pretty normal practice at a pop music concert. I assume people that are sitting in those fancy pants choral seating things on behind the stage know a little better than a lot of other people in the hall, but maybe not. And
but how much is a cell phone?
Maybe they don't realize it's a big
at
deal
a pop concert.
Well, that's true. I mean, there's certainly a different context.
I can scream my loudest at a pop concert and it won't faze anyone. So,
well, you should do that at the next piano recital you go to and see what happens.
I don't even understand the appeal of doing that. Like you're living your whole life through this tiny little screen. Like, just enjoy the concert. Just enjoy it. It's only going to happen that night. Just enjoy it.
Well, it was funny. A while ago, I was getting these these messages from the marketing department of the New York Phil. And I think it's because I was blogging a certain amount. I blog so little, but it was somebody got in their head that I was a blogger, so I was press or something. So that meant that they were inviting me to these Contact events when they first started up this series called Contact with new music. And I think because they wanted to get press people there, they were saying, you can tweet from that. We have a separate section for people who want to tweet and blog during the concert. And I don't know what happened, but that disappeared. I don't know if they're still doing that, but I don't think they are. Because I think there was kind of a bad reaction from people who said, well, no, I just want to go to the concert. I mean, I might blog or tweet, but I wouldn't necessarily have to be doing it from in the concert. Like, just got to bar 52. Sounds great so far. I don't think that people have to go to that extreme. And so I think they maybe misjudged. They may have misjudged their audience, or at least the people who come to write about or report about it, like you guys do.
Well, you see, Derek, the people that they perceive as not wanting to come to orchestra concerts are under 40, and also the people that tweet are under 40. The people that use the internet machine to do the Twitter thing, those people are also under 40, and they feel like that is outreach, is to say you can use your phone to not pay attention to the concert during the concert.
Right.
I think that's their outreach.
Right.
So I think you're not seeing the opportunity that the New York Philharmonic was trying to give you.
Possibly.
I sense sarcasm, Dave.
I don't know what you're talking about. So I think so we didn't really talk about a lot of news. We just talked about shouting at a piano recital, but that's plenty for 1 week.
Yeah.
It's all you're going to get, and you're going to like it. Because we had a long, great conversation with our guest, Derek Bermel. I think it's time for our pick of the week. We don't have Sam to shout pick of the week.
Don't.
So we'll have to use our imagination.
All right. Pick of the week. Go.
Okay, I used my imagination. Our pick of the week is, as we mentioned earlier, from a new CD that came out at the end of last year with Alarm Will Sound, conducted by Alan Pearson, performing all the music of our guest, Derek Bermel. And there's a great piece on there that was commissioned by the Los Angeles Philharmonic called Canzones Americanas. And it's 4 movements, and the one that really struck me is the third movement, which is called Montuno Blue. Derek, we're going to listen to this a little excerpt of the beginning of this. Do you have anything that you would like to say to set this up?
Well, just a shout out to Alan and Alarmal Sound. And by the way, they're performing another movement of Canzones Americanas this week at the Bang on a Can Festival, for those who can make it over there.
All right.
And that's, I think, on the 16th of this month. But no, I mean, I always wanted to write an atonal salsa, and when Dudamel asked me to write this piece, he said that he wanted it to have something to do with North and South America, kind of coming together, because the piece would be featured in the Americas Festival. So it was my moment when I thought, hey, I can write this atonal salsa, or a kind of chromatic, strange salsa.
Well, I think you
but
did.
Then something
you
else
did just that.
Into it. I don't know how, but something else kind of crept its way in.
Well, let's take a listen. This is just an excerpt from the section called Montuno Blue, and Atonal Salsa by our guest Derek Bermel. So that was an excerpt from the third movement of Canzones Americanas, performed by Alarmal Sound, conducted by Alan Pearson, written by our guest Derek Bermel. Derek, thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's a great example of what we were talking about earlier, of not just kind of ripping off in a kind of pale imitation way the idea of salsa, but really, making it a part of the whole expression. And nobody would confuse that for a salsa that you were trying to make as an authentic salsa or an imitation of an authentic salsa, but authenticity. We could let's in our best graduate school voices salsa. Unpack that.
Yes. It's not your grandma's salsa.
So it's obviously not a traditional salsa, but it's also a distinct expression of the idea of salsa. I don't know. Was that completely unclear?
It was. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about all that. Yeah. Okay.
No, I think it's a lot of fun, which I think it's very easy for atonal music to not be fun, and
this was
really
definitely
cool
a fun piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Cool.
So.
All right. Well, you guys, my cats are calling me.
Well, we are just about to wrap up. Do you have anything you want to plug before you go?
Plug.
Yeah,
well,
what do you got coming up that people need to come here?
Well, this piece, that crazy piece based on mathematical principles of symplectic geometry that I was talking to you about earlier, orbit design, that's going to be performed up at Mount Tremper this weekend, if anybody's in upstate New York, up in Woodstock, near Woodstock, New York. It's a great place to go. So I'm going to be up there performing with two good friends of mine, Alex Sopp and Danielle Kuhlman, and we're performing with my friend Abigail Levine, who's the choreographer, and she's made a piece called Distance Measures. So we're going to be doing that, and then Bang on a Can is the next day, all day on the 16th. So people should come out and see that, because there's always a lot of very interesting, very cool music on that.
Definitely.
And after that, going to Maine. And I'm going to be out there at the Bowdoin Music Festival for 5 weeks. And then in August at Cabrillo in California.
Nice.
Marin Alsop conducting a lot of new works for orchestra, all American music. So,
Well, that sounds
good
great,
stuff.
man. Thank you so much for being with us. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
That's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thank you to everyone who joined us, whether you joined us in video or audio formats. We really appreciate you listening. If you would like to comment on the show, or if you have any thoughts on anything we talked about, all the links to all the stories that we talked about, or I suppose the story that we talked about, which was the shouting and the piano. I actually don't know if there was any shouting. There was some YouTubing, though. Anyway. You can find a link to that on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also connect with us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Also follow us on Twitter. As a group, we're at SoundNotion. I'm at Dave McDowell. Patrick is at Vox Shibuya. Tim, who joined us at the very last minute. We had a medical emergency, and Tim joined us with literally about 10 minutes notice, so we really appreciate him, and you should definitely follow him at Tim Rosenberg. And you can follow our guest Derek at D Bermel, and keep up with all the things he's doing. As you just heard, he's got a lot going on. You can subscribe to this show and all our shows at SoundNotion TV in the iTunes store or wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. If you'd like to support the show, you can use the Amazon affiliate links on our site, or you can donate to us. But you know what? This week, don't donate to us, because New Music USA is doing kind of the equivalent of a pledge drive, and they're a very worthy group, and you should give them a couple of bucks. So go over to New Music USA. These are the people that make New Music Box, that make Counterstream Radio. So go over there and kick them a couple of bucks, and forget about us this week. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo and video by Tyler. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you back next week.